So hi everyone, so my name's Sereena Abbassi and I'm an independent equity, inclusion and diversity consultant as well as facilitator. So as you can imagine, I've been very busy over the past 6-7 weeks, have held a numerous amount of focus groups trying to kind of understand what is happening within corporations. So the best way for me to describe what I do is that I've just taken my activism into a corporate space. So mentoring and understanding Black communities in the UK. So I want you to know that this is a safe space for us to talk about race, though what you'll come to realise is there's going to be lots of intersecting identities, which actually moves into class, gender. So even though we're going to try and anchor this in race, and we will anchor this in race, we'll naturally be going into other protected and unprotected characteristics. So for those that don't know, an unprotected characteristic in the UK is class. So you can legally discriminate against someone based on their class in this country. There's actually nothing within our constitution to stop that, which is really, it's awful, but I think it also says a lot about the UK. Class is such a difficult thing to define, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So mentoring and understanding Black communities in the UK. So the content that we're going to look at today, we're going to be looking at understanding Black communities in the UK, understanding structural institutional racism, building trust and respectful conversations, and mentoring characteristics. So obviously the lovely Alex will be talking to you more about this at a later date. So I'm only going to skim through this. All right, so understanding Black communities in the UK. I think it's fair to say, the presence of the past in the present. So there has obviously been progress. There has been progress that's been made. However, there's a lot more work that needs to be done. And in addition to that, I think it's also really useful for us to think about Blackness in quite a nuanced way. So in regards to attainment, just within an academic landscape setting, British Caribbean boys don't do as well as British African boys. And so I think it's really important that we take a very nuanced lens when we're talking about Blackness, and the same with Asianness as well. So British Indians do much better than British Bangladeshis. So, there's within any kind of ethnicity, that is the case. And actually something that I would like to invite you to think about, I'd like to invite you to think about whiteness as a diverse ethnicity. And I invite you to think about yourselves in a racialized way, because when we're talking about Blackness, I think that's really important. And the work that I do, that's the place that I start when I'm talking to primarily white audiences. So how is the Irish experience to the English experience, and how is that also different to the Eastern European experience, for example? We can't talk about race in this country without talking about privilege, and we can't talk about the privileges in which we inherit. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that with you today. So in the same way that we inherit skin and eye colour, we also inherit privilege, wealth, as well as trauma. Just talking about trauma for a moment. So there's some wonderful work that's been done by an African-American scholar, and the reason I bring her ethnicity up and her nationality up is because she has created her career around the trauma that people that are ancestors, offspring from the transatlantic slave trade, and how there's an inheritance of trauma. So as we know, obviously, a lot of our Black population in the UK are from former British colonies. Obviously, there was lots of brutality that happens within those colonies. So when we're talking about race relations or race in this country, I think it's also important for us to think about how trauma has impacted the psyche. And there's also another scholar who talks about how, on a very cellular level, that when we experience trauma, we pass that down to our offspring. Her name is Dr. Rachel Yetuda, and she is a Jewish American scholar. And once again, I bring up her Jewishness because she has tracked the Holocaust survivors, so Holocaust survivors and their offspring, and she found through her research that there was a cell mutation. So that's something that I would like us to also kind of keep in our mind when we think about race relations in the UK and the trauma that one has within their body if they are the ancestors of slaves, or the ancestors of a group that has been ostracized, marginalized to quite a great extent. And also, you know, when we think about privilege as well, our privileges are also inherited. So whether it be, you know, if we were to just look at wealth, for instance, you know, wealth is inherited. I remember reading an article many years ago, or a few years ago, I think it was 2015, and it spoke about first-time buyers in the UK. 25% of them were given deposits by family members. I personally think it's probably more than that, though, you know, that gives people a huge economic advantage. And obviously, as we know, you know, when one doesn't have economic stability or economics behind them, that opens up the, you know, the doors to different types of ailments. There's a wonderful theorist who's done a lot of work around trauma and inflammatory diseases. That's another conversation entirely. Though I want us to just kind of think about trauma and privilege and inheritance. I thought it'd be quite useful for us to look at the colonies, and there's obviously a lot more conversation and literacy around the British Empire. Windrush docked into Essex in 1948. And, you know, obviously there were Black people in the UK pre-Windrush, but on a mass level, on a much larger scale, it really kind of started in 1948. So the Windrush generation is from 1948 to 1970. And I think this is probably one of the best branding exercises in all of history, because actually what we now know the British Empire as is the Commonwealth. So the Commonwealth is a political association of 54 member states. Nearly all are former British colonies. And I think that's really, really important for us to kind of know and understand. The former colonies, so for instance, my heritage is Jamaican, part of my heritage is Jamaican. And, you know, my granddad and great granddad, when they came to the UK, they came under the illusion that they were British citizens. And yes, on paper they were. However, the way that they was received was very different. Very famously, there are signs outside pubs which said no blacks, no Irish, and no dogs. Also in regards to wealth generation. So, and this, you know, this is systemic. You know, my granddad, he found it very hard to rent places in the UK. So he came to London. My great granddad came to Birmingham. Both of them, they literally just had doors closed in their face because nobody wanted to let properties to Black people. So my granddad, as well as my great granddad, what they did is they bought property instead. However, when it came to them buying property, they were offered different mortgage rates to their white neighbours. So the average mortgage is 25 years, right? My granddad was offered a mortgage rate of 10 to 15 years. So one can only imagine the amount of pressure that puts on the family home, economically, in every single sense. And, you know, you're already feeling so much pressure from the outside world, the racism that is kind of built into the fabric of Britain at that time. And then that's further compounded by this economic stress and trauma as well. So just to give you kind of an example so you can see, this is an example of what the British colonies in 1919. But this is just to give you a picture of people who saw themselves as being British, who had never come to the UK until, say, whether it be 48, which was to rebuild Britain after the Second World War, or whether it be the Indian diaspora from India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, who came in the 60s and 70s. But as I say, there was obviously a presence of these different nations prior to that. There's a bit more of an understanding as well around the Windrush generation because of the very recent 2018 Windrush scandal. Now, the Windrush scandal, this is courtesy of Wikipedia because it was probably the best summarisation that I could find. The Windrush scandal is a 2018 British political scandal concerning people who were wrongly detained, denied legal rights, threatened with deportation, and in at least 83 cases, wrongly deported from the UK by the Home Office. So this happened under the Theresa May government. I think some further reading that could be quite interesting for you is the Lammy report. So David Lammy, I think it was 2015, I believe, created a fantastic report and actually looked at our justice system. So I read you a quote from Lammy, which is in one of his Guardian articles that he wrote. So minority ethnic children make up a growing proportion of those offending for the first time, reoffending and serving custodial sentences. Today, 41% of under 18s in custody are from minority backgrounds compared with 28% a decade ago. Young Black people are now 9 times more likely to be in youth custody than young white people. So, this is from 2015, I'm pretty sure, but you might just want to check that. And you can actually find the full report. This is really important for us to also think about in the sense of fines that were also issued during lockdown. So as we know, the Black and Asian minority ethnic community were disproportionately given fines over their white counterparts. And I think that's really something that we should think about in regards to, there's still a huge presence of racism in the UK, of disparities in the UK. And I think it's about us really unpacking that, is it because officers targeted Black and brown communities, for instance? Is that why the numbers are skewed? I would probably say that probably is the case.